behalf of Catalina Consulting and IFI Global, we're delighted to welcome you to this e-seminar. We're going to debate the potential development of an all-Ireland fund industry, and we are absolutely delighted to have so many people join us from around the world. I think we should be approximately at about 140 people potentially joining us from the US, from continental Europe, from England and from Ireland. I would like to thank Invest Northern Ireland for sponsoring this e-seminar in association with IQEQ. And a very important point to emphasize right at the very beginning is that this e-seminar is not a one-off event. It will be followed in the next few days by a white paper covering the topics that we're going to be discussing today. And it comes out of discussions Catalina Consulting and ourselves at IFI Global had in Dublin last spring and autumn, where the whole topic of an all-Ireland fund industry was raised at two separate events. Obviously, at that time, there was no resolution on Brexit, so it was a bit of a theoretical discussion. There wasn't an awful lot we could do with that. At that time, everyone was talking about the possibility of a hard border and all of that good stuff. Thank goodness that's now been resolved. So we hope we can now get on and talk about how the northern part of Ireland can interact with the rest of the island of Ireland. And we very much expect when we come out of this pandemic, there will be an awful lot of blue sky thinking on the future development of the Irish fund industry. And by the way, the Irish fund industry is something I've been following for a very long time. I went round to the IDA at the end of the 1980s and saw a model in their reception back then of a one building thing that people were talking about would go up at some point in the 1990s. And so I've been there right from the start, and I very much hope that with the blue sky thinking that almost certainly will be coming along, that there's going to be a much more expansive and imaginative look about the way the industry could go in the 2020s. We have an all-Irish panel here to discuss this today. And by the way, I would include myself in that, even though I have to reluctantly admit to also being half English. So on the panel today are Andy O'Callaghan, he's Global Advisory Leader, Asset and Wealth Management at PwC. Rosie McCurr, Director, Head of Client Relationships at Funds Access. Owen Harney, Head of UK Fund Operations and Client Services at IQEQ. Tom Kirkpatrick, who's an INED and a former Managing Director at Global Financial Services. And Alan Meany, who is CEO of Fundrex. I'm going to run this as much as I possibly can like we do our physical events, which is to say that we're going to make this informal. Hopefully we're going to have lots of interaction from you out there, wherever you may be. As you doubtless are aware, there is a facility for you to email in questions. Please take advantage of that if you'd like to, and I will try to come to those questions as soon as I possibly can. I'm going to start by asking each member of the panel to make brief introductory comments, and then we will get into the topics that hopefully you will have seen from the briefing paper that I hope has been sent to you. So I guess, Andy, you're front of screen for me here, so do you want to kick off with your introductory comments?
Sure. Thanks, Simon. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Clearly, if someone had told us certainly 8 weeks ago that this is how we would be having this conference, and indeed this is how many of us will be working, I think we would have dismissed it pretty quickly. But there's no doubt from where I sit, so to speak, we have daily conversations with our clients, with the rest of the global advisory team for asset and wealth management, and as we will go through here, the industry has stood up very well globally, across multiple territories. Clearly, we're sitting here in Western Europe, UK, Ireland, Luxembourg, other key territories in Europe have from a financial services perspective withstood these challenges well. But equally, some of the very important outsourcing locations, thinking of Poland, India, South Africa, have done well, and we will explore that. But actually, all of this means that the conversation we're going to have around the All Ireland funding industry is actually more pertinent than ever. Because when we get through these challenges, and we will, the conversation around locational choice, cost effectiveness, productivity, transformation of businesses, including digital and technology transformation, in many ways, all of what we've seen in the past few weeks will accelerate some of the things that were already happening. And in many ways, that's very exciting for the industry, but it'll also bring challenges for the industry. And I'm looking forward to discussing some of those today.
All right, thank you very much. Should we just go down the panel here? Tom, you're next on my screen. So would you like to make your opening comments?
Sure. Yeah, and I think part of that really echoes a lot of what Andy's saying. I think if we look at the key alternative sectors, the market situation has clearly created opportunities for hedge funds. That has tended to happen in the larger managers which have the scale and the speed to market to be able to take advantage of that. I think the environment for startups is still very, very difficult. There are a lot of capital raising challenges, and so survival rates and longevity still continue to be a problem. But capital flows have held up pretty well. If you look at the market indices versus, say, the financial crash, I think there's quite a lot of difference between the two. Performance has held up again relatively well. Forward redemptions have held up pretty well. The only caveat would be whether there are there's capital reallocation further down the line. On the private equity side, I think there are a lot of opportunities for Ireland here. It's coming from a low base, but it's going to be a big growth area for the industry over the space of the next few years. And I think skilling and having access to skills across the whole island is going to be very important there, and also leveraging relationships with existing managers in the United States and the Ireland US relationship is going to be very, very important. And I think when you look at the analysts, sort of consistent feedback you get is that tech-enabled services are probably best placed out of almost any industry segment to be a snapback sector. And I think that fits well with the industry that we're talking about here. And being able to take advantage of a lot of the technology investment that's already happened and the new opportunities that get created for technology investment and online delivery to clients, which in the current working environment is absolutely critical. And I know we'll talk about regulation, which will increase. We'll talk about nearshoring, and there are a number of strands to that. We'll talk about technology, but there are going to be areas like cyber threats, which just because of a global pandemic, the bad guys and state actors aren't going to go away. And it's an area where Northern Ireland has significant strength and experience. And I think when you look at the All Ireland model, and some of us have been talking about this for a little while, Invest Northern Ireland have done a tremendous job in terms of encouraging investment in tech companies, financial services, startups, and existing companies, bringing established companies into Northern Ireland. And I think there's a foundation there of how we really look at how we leverage resources across the island. 30% of the population of the island resides in the north. There are a lot of similarities around educational skills, cultural aspects, and obviously communication lines are very, very short. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity here for us to leverage the skills that we have as an island to support what is going to be an absolutely key industry going forward.
Thank you very much. And Owen, can I come to you?
Sure, of course. Thank you, firstly, Simon, for organising this and inviting us to be part of this. From my perspective, I think all of the uncertainty that we dealt with Brexit over a period of time, and we're almost at a point where there's resolution and clarity around that. is good. I think it probably caused a little bit of divergence between the two jurisdictions while we were waiting for that to resolve. But you know, if anything, COVID has certainly brought into very vivid, you know, vividly shown us that we have codependencies across the island. You know, we have shared challenges, but you know, to Tom's point, we have some shared strengths and shared opportunities as well, and really aligning and collaborating to make sure that we both jurisdictions benefit from that is going to be critical over the next period of time. I think the other thing that's going to come out of COVID is just I guess almost a paradigm shift in terms of thinking around what's possible. You know, all of our organizations have gone through pretty dramatic changes over the last 2.5 months, and I would say have achieved an awful lot in terms of completely changing the complexion of our work environment over that period of time. I think it just shows us as a group what is possible, and will allow us to make some very dramatic and pragmatic shifts in terms of how we approach stuff. For me, I think, you know, if you look at across the island, there's already so much collaboration happening on different levels. You see the CBI, you see IBEC issuing joint statements and lobbying both governments together, which I think really shows an appetite amongst the, I guess, the wider business community to collaborate across those jurisdictions and take advantage of those opportunities that are available to us. I think they're complementary products and not competing products, and really selling it as such, I think, will benefit both parties, both jurisdictions in a substantial manner. You know, and I do think that, you know, they call politics is the art of the possible. I think everybody is so much more invested now in terms of, you know, our well-being, and almost holding our politicians to account in terms of some of the decisions that are made and the positions that are taken. I do think that, you know, there will be more impetus to really drive our politicians towards making better decisions that benefit everybody across the jurisdiction.
Thank you. Alan, may I come to you? And you're in Dublin, I think I'm right in saying. We have a good representation from the north here. It's good to have you on the southern side of the country.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, Kildare actually. So, you know, we'll never claim to be in Dublin when we're from Kildare, but we're quite close to the border here. So I'll let that one go. Yeah, I'm really excited about I guess, touching on some of the opportunities that we have in the funds industry in the next few months. There's definitely a lot of challenges to be covered in this discussion, but from an opportunities perspective, I think Ireland's strengths will be amplified when we come out the far side of this. So stuff like a talented education workforce is going to be more and more important. I think what we're seeing as well is, you know, a resilience in the country from an infrastructure perspective across broadband at home, which is a big factor now that everyone is working from home, and electricity supply has been very consistent. So companies' work from home policies have worked quite well. We're seeing across all of our clients that they've adapted pretty much within a few days to business as usual, but from home, which is something, as I think Owen touched on, we never might have considered was possible for an extended period previously, which now opens up the avenue to getting talent from more locations than we might have considered previously. And obviously on this call, we're going to specifically talk about North and South of Ireland. And I think some of the examples we've seen in the tech industry, there's a Cork-based Indigenous business called Teamwork, and they, towards the end of last year, opened a Belfast office to develop software with a €5 million investment and creating 85 jobs. And one of the factors for their decision back then was an access to talent through the two universities, and also a young, skilled workforce. And I think those issues are going to be more and more important now that we are in the current crisis that we're in. You know, I feel very positive around the prospects for the funds industry. If anyone had said last year that a career in funds would be more stable than dentistry, I think you would have been laughed at pretty quickly. But unfortunately, that's where we are now. And I guess part of this call is to explore how do we make the best of the new normal that we're working towards. And you know, I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts. And you know, if anyone in the attendees wants to ask a question, there's the Q&A function. They can ping it in, and we'll try our best to answer. Yeah,
I'll endorse that, because as I said earlier, please do fire in questions you'd like to. I've got plenty to be getting on with, but please fire your questions in from wherever you may be. Rosie, may I come to you for your opening comments, please?
Thanks, Simon. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Great to be on the panel today. Thank you very much for including me. It's great to be a woman in RegTech as well. So thanks for the invite. I guess the angle I'm coming at today's conversation from is we're a technology, specifically a fund tech firm providing fund technology to lots of different parts of the asset management sector. So asset managers directly, but also depositories, supermancos, hedge funds, administrators as well. And I probably would echo a lot of what Alan has said in that a lot of firms have really embraced this quite well and got up to speed very, very quickly with what is the new normal. And I think it's important that we emphasize that this is the new normal. This is not a flash in the pan. In 6 weeks, we're going to all be back to what we were like before. I think it's really important to emphasize that this is the new normal and how things are going to be. From speaking to clients and helping them get themselves up and running as within the new normal. Lots of feedback has focused around things like operational risk and business resilience. So we're seeing lots of regulatory action in terms of regulators putting in place additional reporting lines and additional questionnaires and documentation that they want from businesses to support how they are coping in the new normal. We've also seen lots of additional scrutiny coming in from board level about cybersecurity and operational resilience, which really should have been at the top of people's agendas long before COVID, but has brought it right to the very fore. And I think, again, echoing some things that Alan has mentioned as well, we can only expect that to increase. This is going to result in additional requirements for due diligence. It's going to result in additional documentation being required and additional testing. I think it's fair to say that while it may have been on people's radars, I think people weren't really prepared for something like a global pandemic where everyone in every location was going to be in some form of lockdown. So I think that's really important to emphasize as well. There's also lots of regulatory change coming in. It's going to back that up as well, which we'll maybe come back to a bit later on, Simon, but particularly around liquidity stress testing in particular is going to be coming in September with ESMA. We've seen the CSSF implement new weekly liquidity reporting as well in Luxembourg as a result of specifically of COVID-19, but it'll be interesting to see what is required to stay post end to lockdown. We've also got some changes around obviously what you mentioned there about Brexit. So I guess around all of that, we've got lots of different considerations, and echoing what some of the panel have said as well on all of the requirements around COVID. There's lots of things to talk about, and I'm looking forward to answering some of those questions a bit later on.
Thank you. All right, I said at the beginning, we're going to go and indulge in some really big blue sky thinking. We're going to start at the sort of the top end, if that's the right way of putting it, of the blue sky, and probably sort of drill down slightly to the more practical as this discussion goes on. And I'm going to raise something that might not ever even happen, given what's going on in the EU at the moment, but a subject I followed very closely from the result of the UK referendum on Brexit and the reaction in Brussels to that when they raised a few months after the referendum the possibility of changing rules for portfolio management delegation. That's been going on and off for the last few years. I won't get into that too much now, but there is certainly a significant chance. Doubtless, everyone's got now, as a result of the pandemic, far more important things to worry about. And I understand today the German court in Karlsruhe is going to decide upon whether or not they're going to allow various things to happen to support the euro. So some dramatic things going on in the EU. But nonetheless, there is, I would have thought, a significant chance that within the next few years there could be changes to the delegation rules in terms of European funds, certainly those funds domiciled in Ireland or in Luxembourg, in terms of their access to portfolio management teams in London. And one of the things I want to raise with the panel is whether or not, if that was to happen, and it's a huge if, I appreciate, the North could get involved in helping funds based in Dublin or elsewhere in the Republic to meet that challenge. Alongside that, I think we would probably all agree risk management is only going to become more important as we come out of this pandemic crisis. There is very likely to be a greater emphasis on risk management for funds, not only in Ireland, but everywhere, certainly everywhere within the EU. So could the North act in a complementary fashion to what's already taking place in Dublin? Because this is somewhat labour intensive, and one would have thought they need more people to do that. Queen's is a fantastic university. I've been to their business school twice over the last few years, and they produce some impressive individuals that come out of there. Is that something that people in Dublin can access without those individuals having to travel down to work in Dublin? So there are two related but also unconnected questions for the panel. Who would like to say that first? Andy, would you like to have a go at that?
Sure, Simon. So, as you mentioned, I think we've all mentioned, there's a huge amount of different things happening at a macro level. Not least the current challenge we're all going through. Brexit has happened, is unfolding, if you like, even though it's not getting the same coverage that it did. But clearly, we will need to return to Brexit planning and make sure that all of our clients, and many of them are already far advanced, but that they are prepared for, unfortunately, still a range of outcomes. Depending upon how the free trade discussions ultimately conclude. But there's no doubt, Simon, to your point, that Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland will play a very important part in the funds industry. There's no doubt about that. And I suppose ultimately it comes back to, what is the ecosystem we're talking about when we talk about the asset management industry globally? It's a massive industry. It employs a huge amount of people. And the technology component of the industry becomes ever more important. So one very obvious strand, if you like, of the ecosystem that really is already operating on an all-island or an all-Ireland basis is fintech. And fintech and Rosie and Alan clearly, their business is very successful within fintech. I feel will be a huge industry in Ireland. So people have seen, I'm sure, the announcement by Fidelity International last week to continue to expand their big technology operations in Ireland. I think the more the island of Ireland offers in terms of talent, experience, attractiveness to businesses that have a technology component, the better it will do. And there's no doubt, and we see it already, InvestNI and the IDA working together on that. I suppose the question that people will ask is, well, actually, if we're now going to go through quite a serious recession, we could well be in one already, does that not mean that actually the big opportunity, which we all looked at many years ago, of really viewing the island as the opportunity for the industry now goes away, because we're going to have capacity in the economy? I actually think more than ever, firms are going to focus on near shore. Alan mentioned that phrase. And South Africa and India and other locations have done very well, and they continue to be very, very important. But if you're sitting in London and the regulators increasingly will ask you around vendor oversight, delegation of various activities, then Ireland increasingly, and other places, becomes even more compelling. And that capacity that becomes available in Ireland, north and south, I think can be used structurally by the industry to increase its footprint. The last thing I'll say, Simon, is that we know of about 120 asset management firms who have chosen Ireland for their Brexit solution, their Brexit planning. Some were here already and are expanding. Others are now in Ireland for the first time. I really believe Northern Ireland has a huge amount to offer to those firms as well. By having an office, an hour north of Dublin, you have access to the UK market. By having it elsewhere, not just Dublin, certainly Kildare, Alan, elsewhere in the Republic, you have access to the entire European Union. So having access to the UK and the European Union on the same island is phenomenal. If you're serving investors right across Europe and indeed across the world, then Ireland becomes a very strong place in which to serve all of those markets.
Yeah, that's exactly, that last sentence is exactly the, I guess, the point. And this is very, very, very early days. I appreciate it, but the point that Andy's just made is it's this being able to look both ways, probably unique in the world, in fact, and there's anything else that's quite like that, because you can play in the north or in the south a role in the Irish fund industry, but also part of the UK industry too. Rosie, can I come to you and ask you about the risk sides? I know this is an area of specialization of yours.
Yeah, so I think I would echo a lot of what Andy said there. I think Northern Ireland has an awful lot to offer. If you look at what we're doing right now, you know, we've got some great fund administration expertise. We've got IQ-EQ, for example, Owen, and we've got Ocorian as well, which is previously Astera. We've got some really big international financial institutions like Citi and Allstate and CME, all in Belfast as well. We've also got lots of indigenous tech companies which are doing some great things, like ourselves, but also companies like Vox Financial, Options IT, Daytactics, First Derivatives, Kainos, all doing some brilliant work as well. So it's really, we've got the great infrastructure in place there. We've got the great high quality graduate talent being produced by the local universities. I think probably on the, focusing specifically on the risk side, as you mentioned, Simon, I think there's one point from a regulatory perspective that really needs addressed, which is around CP 86. So under CP 86, there are residence requirements for directors of fund management companies, for example, and they must have a minimum of 2 directors resident in the state. Now, that means that you could have a director who is resident in Mauritius or somewhere for 250 odd days of the year and spends the rest of the time in Ireland. They would be considered resident in the state. But if you had somebody who lives in Belfast and commutes to Dublin every day, they are not resident. So they don't meet the requirements at a senior level to be CP 86 regulated. And I think that is a bit of a barrier. I think the important thing to note that is an Irish government requirement. It's not a Brexit requirement or a European requirement. I think if we could get some traction and industry-wide engagement on that point, that would be fantastic. I think that there's a bit of a limitation at the moment, though.
Yeah, that's a very good point you raised. And funny enough, we've had some questions in from the audience on the subject of director residency requirements. You probably know Ireland, meaning the Republic of Ireland, requires, as you mentioned, Rosie, 2 Irish directors to be resident, whereas Luxembourg doesn't require any at all, which is very, very strange in the European Union, that either one's right or one's wrong, you know. So that maybe something in the blue sky thinking we were talking about, we could get to that to revisit, get the CBI or the government in Dublin to revisit that. Unless you guys want, I'm meaning Tom particularly, and Owen and Alan, to talk about risk management or portfolio management, I'd like to get on to the second topic on the list of things to talk about, because we've had some questions in from the audience on that, which is to do with the whole potential possibility, and it was just touched upon by Andy, of nearshoring or localism, whatever term you want to use. So shall we get on to that, or any comments from Owen and Tom on what we've just been talking about? Should we go on to that?
No, I think it's been fairly well covered. I think let's move on.
Okay. Well, a lot of people think, and I probably count myself as one of them, that the crisis, the health crisis that the world is going through right now, is going to probably make a lot of people look again at global supply chains and the whole ESG agenda, although it might be rejiggled in many respects from where it was, say, at the beginning of this year, is likely to potentially result in more nearshoring. And something that Rosie mentioned when we had our prep call, which I completely agree with. She said that supply chains is probably going to be a much more important part of managers' due diligence, or indeed investors' due diligence, when we get out of this and we look when we are on the other side. So, So let's start with a broad question. Do you think that the pandemic will result in shorter supply chains, more regionalism, more inshoring, or whatever term you want to use? And any views on that? Tom, you're front and center on my screen, so go ahead.
Okay, so my view on this is that you have to go back and look at why people were offshoring in the first place. And a lot of people did it for cost reasons and ran into problems. Other organizations did it for quality reasons and succeeded. And so I think I'm not necessarily of the view that it's going to result in an immediate change and whole-scale nearshoring, simply because I think the model has by and large stood up through this crisis. That is caveated by client service requirements and individual organizations' operational risk assessments once they get through all of this and understand what worked and what didn't work, and then how they start to address those. They may address those by nearshoring, although obviously there's a cost and obviously a P&L impact of that, or through technology. I think that the greater scope for jobs is as additional requirements are laid onto the industry, usually requiring higher skill, usually requiring proximity to client, that will be taken up through lower cost nearshore locations. But I don't think there's going to be a whole-scale nearshoring. I think it's going to be selective, and I think it's going to be based on individual assessments of either activities or risks.
Okay. Alan, do you want to chip in on this? Is this an area you look at in terms of what you do?
Sure, thanks, Simon. Yeah, I guess we see a lot of business decisions now are going to completely reprioritize what factors are going to be weighted in a different way when making new hiring decisions and new investments. I guess it all comes back to what investors want, and they're still looking for better returns at a lower cost with better transparency. So decisions around where offices are located, where resources are going to be located, it's going to be those three factors that everyone are deciding upon. I think what's happening now is we have much more optionality in where we end up going with those decisions. So working from home just wasn't a common factor that we could have considered 6 months ago when deciding where to locate our teams. What we're seeing in the tech world, and often it's a leading indicator of what eventually comes into financial services, is in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen remote-only companies establish themselves where they have no office, no physical office at all. And that has been happening in the tech world. Now, obviously, we're seeing that by force and by default in the funds industry. And I think now companies are going to have to consider that as a potential solution when they're looking to establish teams. So if they're looking for a specific team to do a specific job, geography is no longer a restriction, which I think then just completely changes their decision-making process around where to locate. So, with the likes of Teamwork last year opening a Belfast office, I think it's a great example of one of the reasons why Belfast is a good choice for a location of the office is access to talent. So as we basically fill out our resources in Waterford from the accessible talent pool there, Belfast would be high on our list of a second development office. I think with the likes of Northern Trust, they're obviously a big office in Limerick is seen as an offshore location. It's being a trend that has been happening for the last 2 years. And now what I really think is going to happen is it's just going to accelerate, and we're just going to see it head in that direction, but at a faster pace.
Thanks. And Owen, you'd be an ideal person to chip in on this, because IQEQ, obviously a global organization, an office in Dublin, an office in Belfast, but offices literally all over the world. How do you see this? It might change as a result of the pandemic in terms of the way an organization like yourselves work.
Sure. So, I would say that offshoring will continue to be part of the strategy. Building centers of excellence in places like Manila, and it has been very, very successful for us and robust as we went through the fun and games of the last 2 months, and has really stood up to everything that was asked of it. I think what has really come out of that is the importance of having a good, strong knowledge base and technical expertise, and relationship management skills in that those nearshoring locations. Building those close relationships with your client to understand what their needs are, and really building that partnership out where you are part of their business. You're an extension of their business, and are able to support them through anything that may come at us. And that's very much been our experience over the last period. I think some of the more legacy or traditional challenges that have been there around the whole concept of offshoring have been around collaboration, have been around technology, and I think having a global workforce that is more used to working collaboratively remotely will only make it a much more compelling and attractive opportunity for everybody to really leverage off skill sets and build those centres of excellence in different places. So I think that it's going to continue. I think it will actually get better, and it will help people in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, in general, in the Republic to really move what they're doing further up the value chain, and really realise everything that offshoring has always promised, and really changing that focus in the nearshore locations.
Thank you. Now, I've been very bad about getting to the questions from the audience. We have 6, I see, but there's one that's specifically on this subject, which I'm going to read out to the panel and to the audience. So please pick this up, anybody who'd like to. Do we think that the CBI will ever consider using NI-based teams within sister companies as not being viewed as full outsourcing, requiring such levels of governance as if it was an external firm? Will there ever be a relaxation to ease a solution from the whole of the country?
That's the name of the game, isn't it? I mean, that's a great question. And Karen and Robinson looked at this quite some time ago in terms of what would be permitted in terms of Northern Ireland supporting the Irish funds industry at a time of considerable stress on the Irish funds industry. And then we had the financial crash and the world changed. But there's no reason why that shouldn't be revisited, in my view.
Okay. Does anybody else want to chip in on that? Anyone on that?
So, Simon, just giving my perspective, I think this is exactly the point, and not unique to this industry, but certainly for this industry, that we should encourage our politicians to be discussing with each other, and indeed then to be informing the Brexit conversation. One would hope that out of all of the trauma that society is going through, that the willingness to do what's right for the end investor, ultimately for society, becomes stronger. I think we're beginning to see that already. So I would think there is a strong spirit of goodwill, frankly, across the island of Ireland to, look at imaginative ways to ensure that both parts of the island succeed going forward. And I think that's to be really encouraged. And I think it behoves all of us, but certainly those maybe in InvestEye would have a role in this, to encourage the politicians to factor this in. As we all know, the Brexit discussions on the free trade agreement are still very fluid. So there's still a lot to play for. And if we all collectively feel, and I believe we do, that this industry has tremendous potential for this island, then I would encourage people who have access to the politicians to look at this in a sensible way. The regulators ultimately will regulate as they're required to do, but the politicians who are involved in the free trade agreement discussions, I think, need to be imaginative, and in that context, this industry should benefit.
I think to endorse what you've said, there's a question, very short question, that says, how do we get the politicians around the table? And to endorse what Andy has just said, as far as I'm aware, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, there's now nothing to stop the politicians of Belfast and Dublin, given the result of Brexit, where we got to at the end of last year, agreeing something like this if they want to. Correct me if I'm wrong. If this is what Andy, I think, was touching upon, that question, in a sense, touched on it too. Am I correct in saying that? There's nothing in terms of Brexit to stop this happening. If individuals who are politicians in the north and the south were to agree something, then it can happen. Am I right in saying that?
I would say so. I mean, I think there's a huge impetus now. That codependence or interdependency between the North and the Republic as co-inhabitants of this island has been so vividly made clear that we have to work together. So it really is, there is nothing holding it back. I think the whole COVID experience, in terms of the impact it's going to have on society is again, shifting what's possible, and positions that people held 6 months ago or 9 months ago or even 3 months ago are no longer really relevant. I mean, the world has changed quite significantly. We've all seen what's possible, and I think there'll be a real appetite to drive this forward.
Yeah, and I think from my own experience as well, certainly talking to representatives of the previous Fine Gael administration, was that would be pushing against an open door. I think the politicians in the North were so tied up in negotiations around actually getting our government back together again that there was no focus on this, and I think that's where some of the work needs to be done.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions as well is how do we get the politicians around a table? And I think what we might need to consider as an industry is how we map that out for them, because obviously they don't have the intimate knowledge that we have. So I think if we can put together a win-win business case for collaboration North and South, where something real and tangible that has economic benefit and job potential, and put it in front of them as a paper, I think then you might get some wheels turning. But we're going to have to do the upfront work as an industry for them.
And thank you for saying that, Alan, because part of the reason for doing it, a very important part of the reason for doing this, is to produce the white paper. And if we can get some consensus that the industry would like politicians to do X, Y, or Z, then perhaps that will happen. I think you've got to leave the horse to water. You can't just expect them just to do it. And if they felt there was agitation from enough people of importance, in whether it be in Dublin or Belfast or wherever it may be, then that could happen. I would like to move on to the third of our. Sorry, did I interrupt somebody? I was about to say I want to move on to the third of our areas of conversation, which is fintech. And clearly, one thing I think we'd all agree on without any shadow of doubt is that, as Rosie said again on our prep call the other day, the use of technology is going to be utterly accelerated by our experience of the last couple of months. I mean, it was going up exponentially anyway, but it's going to go up even more quickly as a result. Here we are on our Zoom call. This is probably Zoom generation 1. In another 2 or 3 years' time, you can have machines that make coffee and play the banjos as well and do goodness knows what else. And you can probably look at Zoom on your on your watch or whatever it may be. So let's spend some time talking about fintech and how fintech in the various parts of Ireland can collaborate more effectively. You've got in Ireland, whether it be in the north or the south, really strong fintech base already. And how can you build on we're pushing an open door here. How can you build on what you've got? Rosie, maybe we can come to you on this. This is one area of specialization of yours, I know.
Yeah, I think our business is incredibly lucky to be working in the asset management sector in RegTech at this time. I think there's no better, more accessible sector to work in that is ready to embrace change and be disruptive. And the opportunities are huge. There's something like 150,000 investment funds globally, and everything is going to change hugely and quickly, more quickly than we can imagine. And that's going to be across the board, areas like audit, legal, risk and compliance, fund documentation, you name it. And I think there's some great companies already in this space, like Alan's Fundrex and like ourselves, who are going out there and innovating and taking on the world, really. I think, echoing what Alan has said there, the next steps for us are really for the companies to start collaborating more to create this more holistic ecosystem. If you look at what we've done recently, and you might have seen some of it in the press, we've been working with Kainos, one of Northern Ireland's biggest technology firms, in relation to artificial intelligence, machine learning and natural language processing. The one thing that is worth highlighting is there is a big difference between North and South, however, in relation to I guess, initiative and support from the public sector. So if you look at everything that's going on in the South, you see a really clear financial services strategy, a fintech services action plan that brings everybody in the industry together, such as regulators, technology, startups, industry bodies, universities. And I think Enterprise Ireland has been doing some fantastic work with direct investment in high potential startups. And I think we're just a little bit behind in Northern Ireland. Invest and I have done some brilliant work. We've now got a FinTech Envoy, which is fantastic. We've got the FinTech Hub at Danske. Companies like Raise Ventures and Catalyst are doing some great work. But there's not necessarily that really coordinated, joined up approach that would really accelerate this forwards. So we just need to see everything coming together into a FinTech strategy. And really, asset management could be at the very heart of that. Invest and I, again, they've done some absolutely fantastic work, but I think there's a bit of a gap there with regard to what can be done in the funds industry specifically. I think given our expertise and location, there's plenty to leverage off, but it just requires that bit of focus.
Alan, you'd be an obvious person to ask the same question to in terms of what you do and how do you see things potentially having changed given the global pandemic?
Sure. One noticeable difference that we've noticed is the lack of engagement on LinkedIn. And I guess as a team, we've been discussing why that might be the case. But the conclusion that we came to is as people are working from home, they're tending to spend their time on impact and focusing on delivering value for their customers. Whereas I think in the office environment, there was more of a fill out the time mentality, and people would have jumped onto LinkedIn to fill out a few minutes. Whereas at home, it seems to be more of a case of let's do my best work in as quick a time as I can and not spend any time, surfing the web. So we're seeing the way people work changing, even just being taken out of the office and working from home. Their actually day-to-day activities and the behaviors are changing as well as everything else. So I think that shift towards focusing on having an impact, spending as least amount of time doing non-value add work is going to encourage people to leverage fintech solutions to achieve it. We're very excited to be collaborating with Rosie's firm Fund Access. We're having them down at Minovate conference and exhibiting at that, and have been great to collaborate with. And I think companies north and south have been collaborating at the fintech level for a couple of years now. And really what we're talking about in this call is formalizing that more with more government support. On the slightly pessimistic side, fintech is going to see a huge challenge in terms of capital funding in the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, we've pretty much seen at a VC level across all startups, the tap's been turned off. VCs tend to almost overreact to market movements on the stock market in terms of their risk on, risk off profile, because they're trying to protect the capital of their LPs and limit the amount of LP calls they need to make. So we're seeing Q2 as pretty much funding falling off a cliff in terms of VC investment, which is worrying for companies that are out there now, but also for future startups, because we know what happens in recessions. People lose their jobs. They finally get a chance to work on the opportunity or the problem that they've been considering for a couple of years through no choice of their own. And often great businesses are formed during this period. So we see a lot of opportunity for supporting companies like that. But then on the flip side, it's definitely dried up in terms of available capital. And that's going to be a challenge for the industry. And I think asset management has to kind of help fill that space as well.
Someone's asked a question that's very relevant to this, and I'm going to put two questions to you at the same time about whether there should be an all-Ireland approach to a fintech strategy. And I'm going to throw something in which isn't necessarily completely fintech, but it's probably part of that, is do you think when you look at collaboration models in the north and the south, if you look at Derry and Donegal, there's very strong collaboration in that corner of Ireland. Is there something on a dual jurisdictional basis that could be done in fintech, replicating that model on a broader basis? Anyone want to pick that up? You're front of screen again, Andy. You're nodding. Have you got any comments?
Yeah. So yes is the answer to both questions. So if we take should there be a fintech, an all Ireland fintech strategy, and then let's come into the regulatory infrastructure, so to speak, right? So if you start with fintech, absolutely. So would investors, Alan referenced the investors, would the fintechs themselves, would technology firms themselves prefer to have access to an island of 6 million people or a jurisdiction of 4.5 or 1.5, it's a no-brainer, right? You would prefer to have access to 6 million and the universities, the institutes of technology, the fantastic labour pool we have across the island, rather than not. So I think so. Therefore, and this probably forms the second answer in terms of the regulatory environment. I think once that's clear, and we probably need all of us who are involved in the industry, some cases for many years, to be making that case a bit stronger than we have done in the past, because there are some who don't want that to happen for whatever reason. But it is certainly in the interest of the end investor and this industry itself if this island has a single offering. We do it in tourism. We can certainly do it in investment. And I do think someone referenced the IDA and the Republic of Ireland government. There is a willingness there to see that happen. And it's good for the industry to have a deeper labour pool, to have greater access to talent is good for the industry. It would be a better reason to have companies set up in Ireland. And you can talk about, well, is the first office in Dublin? We look at Galway, Limerick, Cork, a lot of firms looking there. To have access to Northern Ireland's labour pool for firms will be an advantage. The regulatory point, Simon, I'll answer very quickly. There is no doubt that there's a very strong relationship between the Central Bank of Ireland and the FCA. And I think that relationship becomes even more critical post-Brexit, because many firms will have big operations still in the UK, London, Edinburgh, perhaps elsewhere, but increasingly will have a Republic of Ireland presence for the European Union and perhaps elsewhere in the European Union. So Northern Ireland's place between those two becomes really, really important. And I do believe, we've had conversations with the Central Bank, that a pragmatic approach can be taken, particularly in the fintech space, whereby you are, depending upon what your solution is, you have conversations with both the FCA and the Central Bank, and you explain what you're planning to do. Clearly, the FCA have the sandbox. The Central Bank is not as developed, but they are still supportive, in our experience, of fintechs who come up with good solutions, particularly towards RegTech. So short answer is, I think it'll take some, sorry, I may have broken up there. It'll take some imaginative thinking, but I do think that the FCA and Central Bank will be open to it, provided there's good guardrails and protections in place.
There's a question. By the way, thank you for your questions. I mean, they're flooding in, which is absolutely fantastic, but somehow we'll try and get back to you if we can't do it in this e-seminar today. So apologies if I can't answer we can't get all the questions asked and answered. But here there's a good one I'd like to ask, which is something I'd like to touch upon in the white paper. I like the short, pithy questions, by the way, we've been getting. And one that's just come in is, how can the fintech funding gap problem be solved? Anyone want to pick that up? Tom, is that an area you've ever considered putting your hand in your pocket and funding it all yourself?
My very shallow pocket.
But there is, Simon, there is one easy, Tom, I hope I'm not cutting you off here, but there is one easy fund and support that government can make immediately. So I don't know if anyone is aware, R&D innovation grants in the Republic of Ireland are delayed. So once you spend the money in year one, you only receive a third of that money back in reimbursement over the following 3 years. So even though you have spent it, it'll be another 3 years before the cash flow hits your balance sheet. So really, an easy one for the Irish government is just to pay those 3 installments in one installment the following year. And I think that will give a boost, certainly over the next 6 to 12 months, that companies need, even ahead of getting external funding. But yeah, fire away there, Tom. Sorry to jump in on it.
Yeah, no, it was something along the same lines, Alan. Now we've got a hedge fund guy as Chancellor of the Exchequer as well. We might have a chance.
Yeah, that's a good point. Has there ever been someone who's worked in a hedge fund sitting in number 11 Downing Street? Very good point. But okay, we haven't got very long left. We've only got 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask the most technical question of the lot. If you can do a very short answer to this, I'd appreciate it, because I like a couple of minutes at the very end. Is re the current acceleration towards digitization, how will this continue post the crisis, and what will it look like? Any of you techies out there? Rosie, is that an area you could pick up on?
Yeah, I think, some of our own experiences there are probably very topical. I think from our own perspective, we are cloud native as a business, and we went fully digital well in advance of COVID lockdown starting. We rolled out sort of team by team. We were very organized. We'd already had some business continuity testing through having our CEO out for 3 months. Ill a couple of years ago, and then myself, I took a career break for 4 months last year. So we were very confident in the ability of the rest of the business to function without necessarily all senior management team present all the time. And then we were already we had previously worked towards our accreditation for ISO, both for information security and quality. So we had all of the certifications in place. We were regularly testing those. We had everything ready. So from our perspective, COVID came very, very easily, and we found it very, very straightforward to become digital first. And I think that is the future of work. That is the new normal. And Alan has touched on, a lot of businesses are starting now just to have be digital only, which is remote working from home. And I think that's what we need to be ready for. It's what the workforce is pushing for as well. It's not just a temporary reaction to current circumstances. Actually, it's proved for a lot of businesses that it actually is a very effective way of working. And actually, it gives people that better work-life balance, that they're not sitting on a packed tube for 45 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes in the evening, or on a packed train, feeling unproductive and making themselves sick. So I think what we're going to see is the current scrutiny that boards and regulators are giving to those processes are going to increase. So that will only go up rather than down. And I think something interesting that we'd like to see, and Alan, I think we've touched on this before in previous conversations, is moving to a standardized due diligence model rather than having this fragmented, asking the same question 100 different ways but getting the same response. Also, I think some of the questions you can get at times reflect a lack of knowledge or understanding of cloud technology and infrastructure and information security. And what's probably more worrying is the questions that you don't get asked by some of the companies as well. So I think this is going to continue. It's only going to get more pressurized in terms of questions. Businesses need to be ready for that. But also, I think there needs to be an industry move towards a standard due diligence model.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just
sorry.
Short comment on that one, Simon. It won't take you long. I think the Irish FinTech Working Group are looking at that, the challenges for financial service firms adopting FinTech, and one issue they are considering is how to get towards a standard due diligence questionnaire, which is great to see. So the industry, even ahead of COVID, was reacting to this, and hopefully that this will help accelerate their progress on it. But yeah, back to you, Simon.
I was going to say, we're pretty much out of time. I'd like just to finish, if you could give me even one word or one very, very short sentence, quick answer, is the one practical, doable thing that we could touch upon in the white paper that you think could come out of this, given the discussion we've had, where things could advance, perhaps as a result of the combination of Brexit and COVID-19. Owen, can I come to you? Something very short and pithy, and we'll very quick go down the panel with this.
Yeah, very simple. I think be bold and be collaborative. I mean, there are huge opportunities for us both, and let's just think bigger and make stuff happen.
Thank you. One word or short sentence, Rosie, if you don't mind, and everybody else.
Yeah, very simple, and very much in line with what Owen has just said. I think embrace the change. This is a new normal, and be ready.
Alan?
Yeah, I think we just have to look after our teams and our staff, because in the long term, they're the ones that are going to add value for our clients. So just be mindful, people will be under extra pressure, and extra stress. So burnout is a real issue we have to keep an eye out for.
Tom?
Win-win. We're too small to be competitive. Win-win.
Absolutely. And Andy, you're there somewhere?
Sure, Simon. Hopefully you can see me.
Yep.
Yeah, I think always remember what the industry's role in society is, why it exists, and then in turn how an island of 6 million people can help improve that.
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you all of you who've been following this. And I'm apologise to many of you, but 18 questions on the Q&A, and I haven't got to the majority of those, for which I apologise, but thank you. We'll try and get back to you in some way. I've been thinking in the last couple of days, we might have a section. We have 3 publications, by the way. One of them is called The Tracker, which focuses upon the European fund industry, and we might even start a section on Ireland and its development, specifically in that, where people can follow what's going on and follow up to the white paper. So thank you all. Again, I'd like to thank Invest Northern Ireland and EQ for their support, for the panel, to Andy, to Tom, to Alan, Rosie, and Ian. And hopefully, this is just the start of something. We could be in this situation for months, and even if we're not, we continue to use this particular technology to carry on this discussion. So see you the next time. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thanks, Simon.
Hey guys.
Thanks, Simon.
Bye-bye.
Well done, everybody.
Thanks.